Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Navigating the Tyranny of Efficiency with Lynn Pierre. My name is Clea Sangster. I'm one of your co-hosts this morning. I'm the manager of anti-racism initiatives at Victoria Immigrant and Refugee Center, also known as VIRCS. We're located on the traditional unceded territories of the Songhees, the Esquimalt, and Wasanich nations, colonially known as Victoria, BC. This is the final installment of the Taking Action series, a partnership between SFU Public Square and the Resilience BC Anti-Racism Network. There were 3 other talks prior to this, and they are available for viewing if you're interested in looking at those as well. And they're available on the SFU Public Square website. So I would like to start us off this morning by inviting Heike Chima, the Assistant Deputy Minister, the Ministry of the Attorney General of BC, to say a few words this morning.
Great. Good morning, everyone. My name is Heike Chima, and I'm the Assistant Deputy Minister for Multiculturalism and Anti-Racism Branch at the Ministry of Attorney General. I'm a first-generation Pakistani immigrant, and I'm joining you today from the stolen, unceded, and ancestral lands the Lekwungen-speaking people, today known as the Songhees, Esquimalt, and the Saanich First Nations. Personally, for me, bearing witness to the horrors in Gaza for the last 6 months have reaffirmed my commitment to truth and reconciliation here at home. And I feel it would be disingenuous for me to do a land acknowledgement without mentioning how we can contribute to truth and reconciliation at home. Thank you to the Victoria Immigrant and Refugee Center Society and the hub of the Resilience BC Anti-Racism Network for inviting me to speak this morning. I'd also like to thank SFU Public Square and Resilience BC for organizing this lecture series and hosting today's talk. A lot of us are aware that many of society's systems and structures are colonial and not created with everyone's needs in mind. Many of the institutions that govern us are not only racist, but also anti-Indigenous at their roots. Colonial values have been especially destructive to Indigenous communities and are an insidious part of systemic racism. Maintaining these values is harmful and oppressive and must be addressed directly. In a place as diverse as BC, it's vital that everyone's uniqueness and identities are honored and given the space and opportunities to thrive. Systemic racism harms individuals and communities. It undermines the very strength of our society. But at the same time, the work to dismantle systemic racism can only move at the speed of trust. We recognize that this work is a marathon and not a sprint. In my role as Assistant Deputy Minister, my team and I have been collaborating with Indigenous partners and racialized communities to co-develop an anti-racism legislation that will address systemic racism within government's programs and services, while maintaining a distinctions-based approach that respects Indigenous laws and jurisdictions. Through Indigenous-owned data and other sources of race-based data, we're bringing a sharper focus to areas of inequities and the ways we can dismantle systemic racism. We're looking forward to introducing this legislation in spring of this year. Through this legislation, government will take action on systemic racism and also invest in healing programs for those who have been negatively impacted. Like decolonization, dismantling systemic racism is not about checking a box or paying lip service or virtue signaling. It's an active process that requires ongoing commitment. And I'm proud to be part of this work that aims to go deeper and hold government accountable so that everyone can have more equitable access to the programs and services they need and deserve. Thank you so much for having me, and I'm very much looking forward to hearing from Lynn Pierre and his thoughts on today's important topic. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Heike, for those important words and for calling us in and reminding us all of the part we have to play in dismantling systemic racism and in reconciliation. Next, I would like to invite Yabon Gilpin-Jackson, the Vice President of People, Equity, and Inclusion at SFU, to share some remarks.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me. And thank you to everyone for joining here today. It is absolutely a delight to be part of this series in partnership with Resilience BC and all of our partners here today. I would like to start by acknowledging that SFU's campuses reside on the traditional and unceded territories of the Katzie, the Kwantlen, the Coquitlam, the Musqueam, the Kakite, the Semiahmoo, the Squamish, the Stolo, the Tsawwassen, and the Tsleil-Waututh peoples here in British Columbia. And as we're joining virtually to acknowledge that we are on lands and territories that are the home of over 200 First Nations and Indigenous peoples. It is an honor and a privilege to be on these lands as a newcomer and to continue to do my part on the journey towards truth and reconciliation. Which is very relevant to the conversation we're having today. This is part of the journey. So we invite you today that as you listen with a heart prepared to do what this series was intended to do, which is to take action, so that these are not just words, but they are backed up in the ways that we think, act, and interact in our communities and everywhere that we find ourselves. So over this journey in partnership with Resilience BC, we have had 4 taking action sessions. And each one I think, oh, this has been fantastic. And then the next one is even better and even better. And together we've really been on a journey to unpack and think about our responsibilities in this realm of anti-racism and anti-oppression. We started with Eva Jewell, talking about from structural racism to personal practices. Our second session was with Sarah Augustine around dismantling to rebuild. Our third session last year was on active allyship in the workplace, making anti-racist spaces for workers and communities with Sophie Williams. And of course, today we have you here, Len Pierre, to talk about and walk through navigating the tyranny of efficiency, and really on the other side of that, really delving deep into what cultural safety really means and looks like in institutions that were intended to be anti-Indigenous. So thank you for continuing to do this work. These are critical conversations. We need all of us in this ecosystem having these conversations. And I'm so grateful to Resilience BC for starting this hub and for continuing to move us forward and hold all of us accountable. At SFU, our Equity Compass work is undergirded by several principles, among them anti-racism and anti-oppression, truth and reconciliation, and decolonization work as well. And so all of this makes this conversation very personal for me today as we end Black History Month, this side over here, and have this extra leap year day as well, thinking about all of what this means. This is very personal for me as I think about the intersections between Indigenous peoples and Black peoples in relation to navigating spaces and living with the enduring impacts of stolen peoples, stolen lands, and ongoing colonized impacts and implications and traumatization. These conversations are indeed both local and global. I thank Indigenous peoples and elders globally, past and present, for continuing to lead the conversation on decolonization. And as Len says, making sure decolonization is not a box you can check off on a list of diversity practices, and that we move beyond the shallow and go deeper to the work of cultural safety. I have personally intersected with Len in professional life, first at Fraser Health when we were both colleagues there together, and his introduction of cultural safety to me is something that continues to live with me. Len, I still remember the room we were in with leaders at Fraser Health and the work we did together, and your words that day really deepened this work beyond the conversation we were having in healthcare about cultural safety and health equity. I would say your words and work were what opened for me what it means to do this work in everyday life and in all of the spaces we were in, and not just for me, thinking about it in the box of healthcare. So I thank you for that. To everyone here, I just want you to know that you're about to learn from the best. So please leave this space prepared to take action and to take what you hear from Len and make it come alive in you and in how you live and move through the world as we do this work to restore right relationships for all of us with our First Nations and Indigenous peoples. So thank you very much, and thank you to all the organizers here today. I'll pass it back on.
Thank you so much, Yvonne. Before we move to the main event, there are a few housekeeping notes that I'd like to share this morning. First, please note that this event is being recorded and that the video will be posted to the SFU Public Square website in the next few days. Today's event will take place until approximately noon. Please feel free to take breaks throughout if you need to get up, walk around, stretch, take a bathroom break, etc. Whatever you need to do to make sure that you feel comfortable and that enables you to be present and engaged. Closed captioning can be turned off by pressing the CC button at the bottom of your screen. Sometimes this is under the More button as well if you're having trouble finding it. If you're having trouble hearing the speakers, please try increasing your volume and also checking your internet connection. If you require any assistance for audio, closed captioning, or any other technological issues that you're having, please feel free to message someone with the SFU Public Square in their name, and they'll be happy to help. If and when questions arise for you, please feel free to submit them to the speakers using the Q&A function at any point during the event. That will be monitored throughout as we progress this morning. You can do that whether it's during the lecture or during the actual Q&A period, and we'll do our very best to get to as many of them as possible. In the interest of keeping this space as safe as possible for all folks attending, please respect our community guidelines, which are posted on this slide here, next slide, and in the Zoom chat as well. And above all, there will be zero tolerance for those who promote violence or discrimination against others. Anyone who incites harm towards other participants in the chat will be removed at the discretion of the event hosts. So now finally, I'm going to turn it over to our moderator, Avneet. Avneet Randhawa is the program coordinator here for Resilience BC Anti-Racism Network Hub. Born and raised on the traditional territory of the Semiahmoo, Ketsia, Coquitlam, Kwantlen, Kekite, and Tsawwassen First Nations, colonially known as Surrey. She's an uninvited settler of Punjabi descent. An SFU alum herself, Avneet strives to create spaces that promote radical change, compassion, and resilience against systemic racism.
Thank you very much, Clea. I really appreciate the kind words. I am so honored to be here with everybody in this room, Len, with Clea, with Yabom, with Heike, and everybody at SFU. I just wanted to let you all know that I am joining today from the traditional territory of the Lekwungen peoples, the Songhees, the Esquimalt, as well as the Pasainage First Nations, colonially known as Victoria. And I am so honored to be able to introduce our speaker today, Len Pierre, who is a professional consultant, a professor, and a TEDx speaker, a social activist, change agent, and traditional knowledge keeper. Len has a master's degree in education from Simon Fraser University, and he focuses on the Indigenous curriculum and instruction design. His experience includes Indigenous education and program leadership from various organizations across colonial Canada. He also specializes in development of educational programs and services with decolonization and reconciliation as its core values. He comes to us with an open heart and an open mind, and he hopes to be received in the same way. So without further ado, the moment we've all been waiting for, Len Pierre.
Aichka, thank you so much, Avneet. And in my language, I would just love to say Ait Swayel, Amia Tsap Kwakwilam. Good day, everybody, and welcome. As was mentioned, my name is Len Pierre. My ancestral name is Palikulak, and I am Coast Salish from Katzie First Nation on my father's side and Musqueam First Nation on my mother's side. I'm the owner and CEO of Len Pierre Consulting. We are a tiny but mighty Indigenous consulting firm that specializes in education, training, project management, cultural advising, strategic planning for any willing corporation or organization throughout Turtle Island, otherwise known as North America. I say we're a tiny but mighty team, but I don't know if we even still qualify as that anymore. We are a young consulting group. We just celebrated our 3rd year business anniversary in January 2024. And I say that I don't know if we're tiny but mighty. Maybe not tiny, but we are mighty. Because 3 years ago, it started as a one-man show, me all by my lonesome, as a solopreneur. Today, I have the profound honor of getting to work alongside 25 Indigenous and non-Indigenous consultants and corporate professionals doing the good work of leading the change. And that change is in reconciliation, anti-racism, equity, diversity, Indigenous cultural safety, and humility. So I have that profound honor of never feeling alone in this work. And I say that with the utmost gratitude and solidarity. You know, I've been involved in Indigenous education for the better part of 25 years. 25 years I've been working in Indigenous education, been Indigenous my whole life. And I tell you, in the last 3 to 5 years, I have not felt the solidarity I have compared to the last 5. The last 5 years have been a real game changer in the Indigenous landscape. Words cannot describe the feelings and emotions that I get when I get to work alongside other allied and other professionals, activists, educators, and scholars, you know, who are working together in solidarity. Yabom, my friend Yabom, thank you so much for your kind welcome and opening remarks. I am in solidarity with you. And also, you know, thank you to Assistant Deputy Minister Heike for your opening remarks and your grounding and welcoming. I am here in solidarity with you. And to me and my entire team, you know, solidarity is how we push the bounds of the status quo, the colonial status quo, the inequity that we all feel. You know, it's in solidarity that the real magic happens. And I say that because it's a teaching that I've learned from my dad, who is on my team as a cultural advisor and an elder from Katzie. You know, one of the earliest teachings he ever taught me as a young First Nations boy growing up on reserve at Katzie, you know, he always told me, he's like, you know, son, don't be backwards. And I'm like, what the heck do you mean by that? He's like, well, don't make it all about you. And the way I've interpreted that growing up now in the work that I do is, as Indigenous peoples, I don't want to be backwards. I don't want to make it all about me and all about the Indigenous experience. There are some contexts, you know, that are very specific to us, but the spirit and the energy of the work that we do with my LPC family is in solidarity. It's in unity. It's in that interconnectedness, that interwovenness. You know, when Heike was talking about, you know, how could we not mention what's happening in Gaza at this time, at this very moment? We think of colonialism, we think of atrocities of the past as exactly that. It's in the past. And we know, all of us in this space who show up to these platforms and these spaces, we know all too well, these are not things of the past. They are very much alive and well today. And I've been invited here today to share with you how to navigate what I love to call the tyranny of efficiency. And I say that because it cannot go unaddressed that cultural safety, reconciliation, decolonization, equity, diversity, inclusivity, all of those things cannot exist in our corporate Canadian colonial institutions with the landscape we're currently operating in. And that landscape is a very mechanical, very tyrannical colonial system that values systems, that values efficiency, that values product and capitalism and extraction. And then we come in, with the song and the dance of and the methods and the teachings of being good human beings, being inclusive, being diverse, being less colonial, being culturally safer with one another, and without taking the full consideration of what the context that we're working in. So I have it in my heart and I have it in my mind to share with you what I've come to learn about the tyranny of efficiency. And this is applicable to you if you work in education, if you work in social services, if you work in the healthcare system, if you work in the so-called justice system. And I say so-called justice because justice for who? That's just saying, I'm going to be transparent with you right from the beginning. And if you work in government, right? So I come to you with an open heart and an open mind, and I hope to be received in the same way. And I say that because I'm going to be doing some truth telling. I'm going to be doing some truth telling, and it's by no means with this intention of, shame or guilt or blame or, anything negative in that regard. I aspire to be transparent, to share with you what I've come to learn about the context in which we're currently working, and some tools, tips, tricks, and strategies I use in my professional tool belt to kind of evade some pitfalls and blockades that I encounter in these conversations that you've been a part of in this series with Resilience BC and with SFU. So that's me in a nutshell. I'm not gonna, please, I really do welcome your participation. So please lean into this conversation. One of my favorite things as an educator is to respond to questions. And I know you have questions, and there's no such thing as a silly question. So I welcome all of your questions throughout the entire time here today, and our wonderful event team will be compiling those and organizing those. And I'll leave plenty of time at the end of this presentation to address all of the questions. Not all of the questions, because there could be thousands, I don't know. But as many questions as I possibly can towards the end. So I'm going to leave you with about 45 minutes worth of content, and then I'll open up the room for discussion and conversation. Without further ado, why don't we go ahead and get started here? Yes, I can share my screen. I just like to be able to not distract people. My event team is checking in on me. Can you still share your screen, Lynn? I'm like, yeah, I got it. We're good. Okay, so the tyranny of efficiency. I have received this beautiful terminology. I'm a nerd for words. If you are too, let's start a club. Words are things, I'm convinced. We cannot underestimate the power of words, especially in social change, justice, and transformation. And you know this because words construct our thoughts construct our beliefs, and our beliefs inform how we are going to treat one another as human beings. And so we must examine the power of words, not just interpersonally, like the words that I apply to you in your context and the words you apply to me in my context. We also need to critically examine the words we use to describe our working environment. If we want to embark on initiatives to decolonize systems, how are we going to do that when we live, work, and play in very colonial systems? And I'll talk more about that on later slides. But we need to be able to come up with new, creative, innovative words to talk about the context that we're currently working in. So many of the times, the professionals, the very well-intended, well-educated corporate professionals that I work with, at the end of the day, think that equity, diversity, inclusivity, cultural safety, reconciliation, decolonization, we take it down to such a interpersonal level. Like, I have to be kinder to you. I have to be more respectful to you. And I'm like, hold up. No. This isn't about being kind, and this is not about being respectful. All of these initiatives that we're talking about today are about change. Changing the status quo and challenging the status quo. That's what we're really talking about here. And we wonder why we encounter so many barriers. We encounter so many barriers because we operate in colonial systems that perpetuate the tyranny of efficiency, efficiency-driven models. So throughout our slide presentation here, I encourage you to think about your ways on how you challenge the status quo to embed cultural safety, reconciliation, decolonization, equity, and inclusivity. So before I begin, I want to be very clear with my intentions for holding the space here. My intention for the next 90 minutes or so is to create a safe space for exchanging knowledge, conversations, supporting one another in solidarity. I come to you with an open heart and an open mind, and I hope to be received in the same way. And of course, I cannot encourage you or invite you enough to lean into this conversation. One of the things I always say in my professional practice is, gone are the days where we are passive bystanders towards the Indigenous work, towards the Indigenous context. And definitely gone are the days where we're the passive bystanders towards Indigenous suffering. So I invite you to lean in, to listen and to learn wholeheartedly, and to participate. Your participation here really matters. And the best way that you can participate is asking the good questions that I know that you have at the top of your mind. And if you ever think that, or here's a cultural safety tool I will leave you with. If you are in a place of hosting presentations, chairing meetings, teaching classes, if you hold space for a living, here's a cultural safety tool I will leave you with. If you are in a space of holding space, I often encourage folks to begin, before you get to chairing the meeting, before you get to teach the class, before you get up to speak to the masses, begin by being transparent with your intention. That's a cultural safety practice me and my team use at LPC, but it's also a cultural safety practice that we use in our Coast Salish culture. If you ever come to one of our Longhouse ceremonies or community celebrations, often the speaker, the host, the first words that will come out of their mouth to all of the guests, all of the visitors, will be being very transparent with the intention that the family, the host, that has invited you, they'll be very transparent with how they want you to feel in that space. So if you're in the business of talking about, racial equity or diversity or cultural safety, if you're in that space, if you're in that zone, I would say go ahead and add intention setting at the very beginning of your PowerPoint presentation or in your opening remarks before you speak, because transparency and being transparent with your intention, being intentional and being transparent are some of the best cultural safety tools that you can add to your professional tool belt. And you don't need to be Indigenous to mobilize that practice. So let's talk about decolonization. As it's been brought up, decolonization today in my mind is really brought up as a tick boxy kind of moment. And it's important to know through this conversation that there's no one universal word or definition for decolonization. When I was doing my master's degree at SFU, I think I've read like 50 different definitions for the word decolonize. So what I've learned through that is that decolonization really depends on the context in which you mean to do that work. And what I did learn after reading 50 different definitions is none of them floated my boat. They didn't really float my boat, so I created my own definition for decolonization. My definition for decolonization is that decolonization is an active process of deconstructing, dismantling, and disrupting colonial barriers that isolate us, suppress us, and quite often oppress us. So it's an active process. That's how I define decolonization. So when it comes to seeing how colonial our systems really are, or how anti-Indigenous Canada really is, we need to deconstruct what I call colonial socialization. And I don't know if you know this already. If this is new information for you, let me know in the chat box, because I would love to know if you've attended cultural safety workshops and they brought it up. But it's been my experience that this is a big missing part of the puzzle for many Canadians. A lot of Canadians who want to get into decolonization or reconciliation will dive straight into the residential schools. And I'm like, that's great, that's wonderful. But before the residential schools even happened, we had to have settler colonial socialization. So socialization, by definition, refers to a process of social influence through which a person acquires the culture or subculture of their group. And in the course of acquiring, these cultural elements of the individual self and personality are shaped. Colonial socialization is the means of colonial settler societies training or conditioning its new and incoming citizens into being anti-Indigenous to advance colonization in Indigenous territories. I'm seeing in the chat box, new information, likewise. Thank you. Thank you for letting me know that. As an educator, I can only hope that I'm offering some new concepts or ideas or stimulating some thoughts. So thank you for letting me know that. But ultimately, this is the platform that we're standing on. This is the first initial ingredient in the tyranny of efficiency. We have to pause, take a step back, and realize that anti-Indigenous comes from not bad people, not systemic barriers. We socialized it into the fabric of Canadian identity. Sorry, just being transparent. And if that feels harsh, if that feels brash in the 21st century, in the year 2024, Canada's not alone in this. It's very common, it's very typical of colonial settler societies across the planet. The United States, New Zealand, Australia, all colonial settler societies on the planet today have an anti-Indigenous narrative. Why? Because new settler societies have to create an anti-Indigenous narrative to advance colonization. And if you ever, wondered, where anti-Indigenous comes from, it's embedded into Canada's DNA. I really understood this and learned this through this quote by the Honorable Justice Marie Sinclair, who said, while Indigenous children were being mistreated in the residential schools, when we were told that we were heathen, savages, pagans, and inferior people, that same message was being delivered in the public schools of this country. That's socialization through and through. For over 100 years in Canada, while our children were in residential schools, in the public schools, there was this preaching, this conditioning, this brainwashing of an anti-Indigenous narrative for over 100 years, from kindergarten to grade 12, from coast to coast to coast, in every province and territory in Canada. That's socialization. And that's how deep the rabbit hole goes. And when people say that this is lifelong learning and lifelong unlearning, it's because that's how systemic anti-Indigenous sentiment is in Canada. But this is where it comes from. Now, I don't take it for granted that we all know what exactly we've been exposed to that is socialized into, Western culture. So, there's 6 images on the screen here. These are just a snippet of some examples of colonial socialization. Now there's 6 images on here, and I want to do a fun little game here. If you recognize all 6, then you're going to give yourself a 6 out of 6. You're like, know that, I've seen this, right? So in the chat box, let me know how many of these images you've been exposed to in previous. This is just a fun little social experiment. 6, 6, 3, 5, 5, 5, 4, 3, 6, 3. So it's all relatively high, right? All of these images here have an anti-Indigenous narrative. or an anti-Indigenous value about it. For the purposes of time, I don't have time to go through each image, but two that I will speak to on this screen here is because they're popular. Well, all of these are popular, but I'll speak to the sports mascots first. Sports mascots, well, sports itself is a pillar of Western societies today. We have a sports section in the news, and we have, Sunday football largely shapes American and Canadian culture. And so the real problem I have with sports mascots is, number one, they are cultural appropriation and public displays of what I call cultural humiliation. I say it's cultural humiliation because these perpetuated visual images of racist, derogatory, or appropriating Indigenous culture is humiliating because we're seen as less human, not contemporary, and it completely extracts from our culture. The real problem I have with sports mascots is, yes, they're affiliated with sports teams, but who houses these sports teams? Colleges and universities. And who goes to college and university? We do. We, the future professionals of society, go to an institution where we are receiving these subliminal messages that it's okay to perpetuate and appropriate Indigenous culture subliminally, right? Subliminal messaging, we're saturated in it, constantly absorbing it, and it's contributing to our biases as community members. Now, through social sciences today, we have research and evidence to show that 90% of our biases that we hold as human beings are implicit, meaning we're completely unaware of them. So we don't know what we don't know, what we've picked up about Indigenous peoples through socialization, right? We don't know. Second thing I'll point out on this screen here is the Bugs Bunny and Tweety show, right here. I'm 38 years old, I think. And I grew up watching Saturday morning cartoons in my pajamas, eating cereal on the living room floor. And I watched the Bugs Bunny and Tweety show religiously. And I distinctly remember watching this episode of the Bugs Bunny and Tweety show. And if you've seen this episode, let me know in the chat box. If you haven't seen this episode, this is what happened in this episode of the Bugs Bunny and Tweety show. Bugs Bunny is defending this fort, presumably in some desert in the United States, and he's defending this fort against Native American Indians. And the Native American Indians are, yeah, a lot of people have seen it. The Native Americans are attacking this fort. They're trying to take it over from Bugs Bunny, probably because they want that land back. So in defense of this fort, Bugs Bunny is shooting and killing the Native American Indians. Only as he's shooting and killing off the Native American Indians, he's singing this song. 1 little, 2 little, 3 little Indians. 4 little, 5 little, 6 little Indians. And for every Indian he killed, he would tally it on a scoreboard next to where he was stationed. He would then go on to say, oh, never mind, that one was a half-breed, and wipe away half of a mark. What kind of messages do you think children are picking up when they're watching a cartoon like that? Which messages do you think they're getting about Indigenous peoples in this cartoon? Let me know in the chat box. Erasure, unhuman, that we are disposable. Dehumanize, that we don't matter, less than whole, not value, less. Murder is okay. Thank you. These are the messages. I call this subliminal messages in one of my sessions, and a nurse raised her hand. She's like, Len, that's not subliminal. And I was like, you're right. This is not subliminal messaging. This is explicit messaging that is Indigenous people are dangerous people, enemies of humanity, and enemies of the state. I say enemies of the state because who do you think Bugs Bunny represents in this image? He's got the blue suit on, the cowboy-looking hat, and he's got a rifle. He's representative of like your everyday American man. So the Indigenous peoples, right, are symbolic of enemies of humanity, enemies of the state. So again, this is contributing to our implicit bias. This less deserving, less worthy people. And further to this screen, this is just a few more examples of socialization. You have all heard of the Cowboys and Indians kids game that, depending on the generation and place you grew up in, you played Cowboys and Indians. If you've ever heard of the term Redskin, I just learned this one 6 months ago. I'm on my own learning journey. I just learned this one 6 months ago, that the term Redskin is actually applied to when a bounty used to be placed on Indigenous people's heads. And so early settlers and colonizers who were, settling lands from east to west in North America, they were paid a $200 bounty for every Indian they shot and killed and scalped. So if they brought in 3 scalps, that's $200 per scalp. That's where the term Redskin comes from. And you hear it used in a very derogatory sense in the United States today, and even in some of our own Indigenous communities today. But I did not know the origin of the term Redskin and where it really came from. Other images we have here are Peter Pan. Disney is not all sunshine and rainbows. It has one of the most relentless track records for perpetuating racist ideology and racist imagery. And yeah, only in recent decades, they've actually pulled them. And Disney is very well resourced where they can go in and extract all the stuff they shouldn't have done. So it's hard to find today, but there's still residual effects out there. Other animated films, when the 60s scoop was perpetuated with this adopting Indigenous people. And the news and media is not all sunshine and rainbows either. If you look at the news story coverage about any Indigenous news stories in the 1990s and well into the 2000s, it was always this clash of cultures. The news has a relentless track record of creating and stoking the fire of tension and animosity between Indigenous and non-Indigenous Canadians, right? The news in the 90s was always like, watch out, those Indians are at it again. They're marching, they're protesting, they're blockading. Right up until Idle No More. When Idle No More happened in around the 2010-ish year, Idle No More, it was like, and it was just really, really fueled by news and media as well. They're on the warpath, exactly. Thank you, Nancy. Fear mongering, totally. So we all know that we've been exposed to socialization to some degree. This is why we're here. This is why we're having this conversation. And this is why socialization is really important to know, because there's no such thing as an isolated anti-Indigenous racist moment. There isn't. I don't know if you all remember, I shouldn't laugh, I shouldn't giggle, I'm sorry. Do you all remember the lobster wars that happened in the summer of, what was that? In the summer of 2021, maybe? The lobster wars, the non-Indigenous fishermen on the East Coast literally burned down the fishing sheds and fishing nets of the local First Nations fishing group. Out of a fear, the First Nations people were capturing all the fish. So there were these lobster wars. Those are not bad fishermen, right? It is a product, it's a manifestation of Canadian socialization, colonial socialization. Do you all remember the grandfather and granddaughter who were arrested in broad daylight at the Bank of Montreal? And were arrested and displayed in public, handcuffed. And, that's not a bad bank. Those are not bad VPD officers, though I don't know. Those VPD officers did not show up to their own reconciliation ceremony. So they're kind of really, they messed up on that one. But that's not a bad bank. It's a manifestation of colonial socialization. Joyce Ekwon, who passed away in a Quebec hospital in 2021 or 2020, lost her life in a Quebec hospital because she was overly medicated. And the nurses who were providing her care, were saying really hurtful, hateful things towards her when she was dying. Like she deserved the pain she was in, that she was only good for one thing, and that was sex. And, really hurtful things. And you know, people later and after Joyce passed away, you know, they said, well, those are just two bad nurses. And I'm like, those are not just two bad nurses. There was a lot that had to happen in the tyranny of efficiency in that hospital, in the culture of that hospital. Those nurses felt so safe and comfortable in their racist treatment of Joyce. They broadcast the racist remarks about her over the PA system, over that entire floor of that hospital. That speaks volumes to how socialized, how ingrained anti-Indigenous in this country really is at the end of the day. So we need to know a little thing or two about socialization. And it's ultimately why we're here. It's why reconciliation is the thing, and it's why cultural safety is so vital for every single organization that works with human beings for a living. All right, that's socialization. Socialization does not exist by itself. It also is married into colonial ideology. Colonial ideology and socialization really give way to our tyranny of efficiency here. We're getting to tyranny of efficiency, but I have to let you know where it came from. It also comes from colonial ideology. Canada is a colonial country through and through. And so colonial ideology is the idea that Indigenous peoples are less deserving, less worthy people. That's colonial ideology. Here in the 21st century, in the year 2024, we're like, oh, that sounds harsh. That sounds brash. That sounds terrible. Not Canada. But it's important to know that through colonial ideology, it's what gives way. It's how colonial countries could be born to begin with. Canada could not exist with the ideology or the framework that Indigenous peoples need to be respected. You know, if early settlers and colonizers came into our lands and territories and said, you know what, we need to respect the human dignity and the human rights of these local Indigenous peoples here. Canada never would have been born with that type of ideology. Canada can only exist in the ideology that Indigenous people are less deserving, less worthy people. So it's only natural now that every system that now scaffolds this country, healthcare, education, justice, social services, government, private corporations, environment corporations, every system that scaffolds this country now does uphold colonial residues of an anti-Indigenous nature. So to get a sense of what's being scaffolded here, we need to read between the lines just a little bit. If we read between the lines, we'll encounter aspects of male supremacy. Male supremacy exists in Canada. You know, if you are on your journey for equity, diversity, inclusivity, a lot of people think that equity and inclusivity and diversity, that it comes from racial equity in the workplace. That wasn't the original intention with inclusivity and diversity in the workplace. The original intention was gender inclusivity in the workplace back in the 1960s. Because back in the 1960s, men dominated the workforce. And in the 1960s, men made way more money than women. So inclusivity, gender inclusivity started way back in the 1960s. And after working on this for the last, you know, decade after decade after decade, men still make way much more money than women and get promoted way much more quicker. And if you look at governing bodies and government systems in itself, up into the last maybe 5 to 7 years, have been predominantly dominated by white middle-class men, cisgendered men. So, you know, we've been working on equity, diversity, and inclusivity, and it hasn't really served, you know, it's been small incremental changes over a period of time. But male supremacy exists in Canada. Sadly, we lose a woman due to domestic violence against her in Canada every single week. That's not even Indigenous stats. That's mainstream Canadian stats. We lose a woman every single week in this country because of violence against her. It's because we come from a male chauvinistic background with male supremacy in this country. And that's in stark, I share that with you because that's in stark contrast towards how we orientate ourselves as Indigenous peoples. as Indigenous cultures, throughout Turtle Island, our cultural norm is we are typically matriarchal and matrilineal. Matriarchal meaning that the women were the bosses and the heads of household and had all matters of say in leadership and governance for a nation. And matrilineal meaning that we didn't inherit anything from our dad. All our inheritances came from our mother's bloodline. Our names, our cultural possessions, our rights to hunting and fishing and medicine territories, that all came down our mother's bloodline. So when early colonizers came into our lands and territories, they were like, look at these natives. They give their women way too much power. And so they were disgusted by how much power we gave our women. And so they had to assimilate it out of us by the Indian Act and Indian status cards, where if an Indian woman married a non-Indigenous man, she would lose her status. So they assimilated it out of us. But male supremacy exists in Canada. And that was taken over from Europe, right? Europe's not the only cultures to have male supremacy. There's many cultures around the planet that have male supremacy, but it is in stark contrast towards First Nations, Métis, and Inuit cultures. White supremacy also exists in Canada. Full transparency, I've observed and witnessed that white supremacy can be a trigger word for some people. There's a lot of misconceptions about the word white supremacy. White supremacy exists on a spectrum, and a lot of people's minds go straight towards swastikas and the KKK and violent hate crimes, which we associate somebody to be bad, right? Like bad people. What I'm much more interested in cultural safety is how white supremacy shows up in more subtle, socially acceptable forms of white supremacy. An example of that I have is in the education system. As a child of the 90s, I can honestly tell you that I grew up in school from kindergarten to grade 7 without ever reading a children's book with a person of color in it. And that's in the 1990s. And mind you, all the sitcoms I watched, like Friends, Frasier, Everybody Loves Raymond, there was no cultural diversity in our sitcoms back in the 1990s. And that was my time growing up during my formative years as a First Nations young man. And I teach this. I teach cultural safety in the healthcare system. And doctors, old school doctors will come up to me and they'll tell me, they're like, Len, remember when you were telling us about how you never read a children's book with a person of color in it? And I'm like, yeah. They're like, that's kind of like our medical school training. And I'm like, oh dear, that's problematic, isn't that? So white supremacy does show up in our culture throughout Canada. Less and less today because of the magic of equity, diversity, inclusivity, and multiculturalism initiatives in every sector in Canada. But for the largest part, it's what we've been exposed to for countless generations here in this country. Other aspects that we have here are paternalism, systemic racism, exploitation of people, lands, and resources, assimilation, capitalism, disease, cognitive imperialism, parochial, conformity, saviorism, ageism, and there's all the isms, right? There's ageism, racism, ableism, sexism, all are scaffolded within this model here. Heteronormativity, gender violence, destabilization, marginalization, and genocide. Now, I want you to think for a moment, in your learning journey so far, where do you think marginalization comes from in Canada? I think it comes from us living in a colonial settler society. We live and operate in a colonial settler society that was designed for very few in mind. And the dominant narrative we tell ourselves as Canadians is that we're kind, we're progressive, we're respectful, and we're multicultural, right? We are not a multicultural society. We're a society of many cultures. There's a big difference. We're not a multicultural society. We're a society of many cultures. To say that we're a multicultural society would mean that you speak 12 different languages, that you celebrate all of the cultural holidays that make up this country, or that you celebrate and recognize and practice many different spiritual and religious faiths. So I say we're not a multicultural society. We're a society of many cultures. Yeah, we're Mosaic. I roll. I'm with you. So all that is to say is that, Canada is built on a very solid foundation that is anti-Indigenous in nature. All of these blocks here, if this temple is Canada, these blocks that you see under Canada are anti-Indigenous laws and legislation. So Canada is built on a very firm foundation that is anti-Indigenous in nature. The Indian Act, arguably the most racist piece of legislation that exists on the planet today, is not in some other country, it's in our country. And it still exists today, governing thousands and thousands of First Nations people who are under the Indian Act, and more than 600 different First Nations communities who operate under the Indian Act as well. The residential schools did not help in willy-nilly. They didn't just pop out of thin air. Residential schools were built into Canadian legislation. If we did not surrender our children, we were thrown in jail, and they would take our kids anyway. The Electoral and Franchise Act, the Civilization Act, 60 Scoop, you name it, Canada's built on a firm foundation that is anti-Indigenous in nature. Okay, I'm gonna be really transparent with you. I feel safe with you. I really love the energy that's coming in the chat box, so keep that coming. It's really validating that you're picking up what I'm putting down, but I'm gonna be transparent with you all. And let me know if you've heard this. Maybe you've heard this from friends. Maybe you've heard this from colleagues. But I tell you, doing the work that I do, I'm often met with the question, or even just the statement, that there's no such thing as systemic racism in Canada. What? There's no such thing as systemic racism in Canada? Oh, take for example, the murder of George Floyd. When the murder of George Floyd happened in the summer of 2020, here, right, that sparked, and Black Lives Matters, right, and that all those conversations came north of the border, and we started having our own conversations around police and RCMP brutality against people of color here in Canada. And very brave, mind you, very ill-informed police chiefs and leaders of the RCMP came before the news press in front of thousands of people and declared what? There's no such thing as systemic racism in the RCMP. Very brave, very uninformed. What that's telling me is that they have no clue what colonial socialization is. They have no clue what colonial ideology is. And that does not, what that tells me is that they have no idea that the RCMP was founded on racism. The RCMP was built as a military task force to oppress or kibosh any Indigenous resistance when the formation of the Indian Reserves were created in Canada. Once that job was done, their next marching orders were to remove our children from our families and place us into the residential school system. It's very uninformed. And when Joyce Ekwon passed away in the Quebec hospital, right, and in the very next day following her death, the Minister of Health of Quebec and the Premier of Quebec came before another television news press gathering and said, there's no such thing as systemic racism in the Quebec healthcare system. I don't know who those people's publicists are or media relations people are, but somebody's not doing so well. But ultimately, that's why we're here. This is why we're having this conversation. And this is the context we all work in, right? Whether you work in, okay, sorry, I'm not picking on SFU. You're the host of this meeting, and I work in the domain of education. It's where I cut my teeth in my career. SFU, UBC, Langara, KPU, no university, college, or even K-12 elementary school district is exempt from this context. Fraser Health, Vancouver Coastal Health, Island Health, Interior Health, Northern Health, any health system, First Nations Health Authority included, no organization exempt from this context. My own company, LPC, is not exempt from this context that we are all working in. And at the end of the day, we have to ask ourselves, how are we perpetuating? How are we contributing? Or how are we benefiting from this model that we see on the screen here? And those are questions that I'm always looking to explore more. Because if we can ask ourselves really good questions like how we benefit, how we contribute, or how we perpetuate colonial ideology, that's where we can start to find some food for thought or some ideas to grasp and workshop a little bit so that we can embed and transform even further. Okay, how am I doing for time here? Okay, 10 more minutes, I promise. Okay, that was a lot. Oh, that's so much. And can we skip to the good part? Is often what people are always asking me, right? But I know that was a lot. And I respect you too much in the work that you do to be a gatekeeper here. I'm not going to gatekeep from you. And nor do I think that you are unworthy of me being a speaker and a holder of some knowledge, to pinch you off from the truth. And, we are in a time of truth and reconciliation. And a lot of people think that truth is about just learning about the residential schools. And I'm like, hold up. The truth is not just about the residential schools. The truth, and, a lot of people think reconciliation too is just about the residential schools. And I'm like, it's not just about the residential schools. Because if we take this whole diagram and we just reduce it down to the residential schools, we're missing like 99% of what else is at play here. And the residential schools, I'm just going to say it. I get spicy here, right? I'm just going to say it. The residential schools associated is something that has happened a long time ago. Yes, there's intergenerational trauma today, but this colonial ideology and systems of oppression, very much alive and well today. This is why when your work is invested in equity, diversity, inclusivity, I got your back. I aspire to be an ally towards all folks who are championing the good work of equity, diversity, inclusivity, because you're working in this context too, right? China dismantle, disrupt, deconstruct, all of those things that separate and suppress us. EDI work, equity, diversity, inclusivity, not the same thing as cultural safety, reconciliation, and decolonization. They're two different things. And we can talk more about that if you have questions around that. But, this is why we're here. This is why we're having this conversation. So that was a lot, I know, but again, I just respect you too much in the work that you do to gatekeep here. So to transition, it's not all doom and gloom, right? There is good news. And I'll use this quote by Dr. Martin Luther King: "Out of the mountain of despair, a stone of hope." Because that last slide, that was a mountain of despair. But we have all of these stones of hope that are happening at this very moment. You being here, listening, learning, and leaning in is one of those stones. You participating, your presence matters, right? So we are re-socializing ourselves at this very moment. We are the medicine, we are the antidote that is countering that tide, that tsunami that's been coming over this country. So there's not some good news, there's a lot of good news. Re-socialization is in progress. If you're a parent and you have children in the education system today, you know this. They inherited a school education system that is much better than when we were going to school, like in the 1990s. So Indigenous content and curriculum is now taught from kindergarten all the way to grade 12 in almost every subject area. We have new post-secondary requirements that are emerging at this very moment. If you want to work with human beings for a living, you have to know about reconciliation. You have to know about cultural safety. That's for doctors, absolutely, nurses, social workers, teachers. There's a new requirement that you have to know about the Indigenous context because you're going to work with Indigenous peoples in your professional practice. We have emerging Indigenous cultural safety health standards, which is huge, a huge part of re-socialization and addressing the widespread systemic racism that is inherent in our Canadian healthcare system. We have the new National Day for Truth and Reconciliation, big game changer. It fills up my cup and it feeds my spirit. And I think it does for my ancestors too. When every September 30th for the last 5 years, I see this ocean of orange, right? This ocean of young and older Canadian people wearing their orange t-shirts in solidarity and building the awareness of the not so great history that we all share in this country. That fills up my cup. And I think that my ancestors dreamed of a day where this would come. We have the new National Day for Truth and Reconciliation. Oh, I spoke about that. Our province has taken in UNDRIP. We have the First Nations Health Authority, which is the first of its kind in the world, and it's no small thing. And if we have land back, land back is already happening. A lot of people freak out with land back. They're like, oh my God, I got to hand over the keys to my car and my house. And I'm like, hold up, calm down. Land back is not as serious as our minds really make it out to be at the end of the day. And if we have the courage and the bravery or the audacity, you know, we can all get behind land back, and we should get behind land back. And when we have systems that embark on their own cultural safety and learning journey, land back is just going to come much more faster and much more meaningful. But it is important to know that land back is already happening. Municipalities, provincial governments, the federal government, corporations, even non-for-profit organizations. I see my friend and colleague Penny is in the space here. Non-profit organizations are seriously talking about land back and have contributed to land back. And that's no small thing, because that is the medicine. That is the antidote for colonial socialization, genocide, land theft, and all of those things as well. All right. Last couple of slides here, and then I will zip it and hand the floor over to you to see if you have any questions, which I see we do have already. So let's talk about how this plays out in the tyranny of efficiency. I really want you to think about right now your work in equity, diversity, reconciliation, cultural safety, decolonization. You're all here for a reason. There's something that made you click register for this session. I want you to think about what some of those barriers are, some of those limitations you've encountered, and where they come from, and what is scaffolding them, what's upholding them, because that's what I want to learn more about. And hopefully in these spaces, we can kind of exchange tools, exchange knowledge and resources to actively dismantle. That's decolonization, when we can together find promising practices for addressing that. Here are some of the things that I've encountered. So cultural safety does exist within a spectrum. For the most part, that spectrum starts with cultural avoidance. Here's the first act of the tyranny of efficiency. And I'm just going to be very transparent with you. I don't mean to pick on leadership. Leaders, we need you. Coordinators, managers, directors, executive directors, presidents, CEOs, board of governors. You have the biggest opportunity for cultural safety. And I invite you to lean in wholeheartedly on how you might be scaffolding, perpetuating, or benefiting from colonial ideology. So I'm just being transparent. And sometimes leadership can be the biggest gatekeeper for really important resources, time, staff, budgets, money. And sometimes I've seen leaders who come from, cultural avoidance. Thank you, Edith, or, oh, sorry, I don't know how to say your name. Elid said in the chat box, we just treat everybody the same. That's cultural avoidance, right? I don't see color. I don't see culture. Teachers in the elementary school system will tell me this. Len, in my classroom, I don't see color and I don't see culture. And I'm like, you just erased your entire Indigenous student body. And they're like, no, that's not what I meant. And I'm like, but that's how it comes across. I think we have very well-intended Canadians who like to say that they don't see color and they don't see culture, but it's very dangerous language at the end of the day. Because if you're refusing to see my color and you're refusing to see my culture, what you're really telling me at the end of the day is you're refusing to see my reality. And if you're refusing to see my reality, you can't treat me with respect. You can't treat me with dignity, and you cannot treat me with safety if you are not taking all of that which I am into consideration. So I think that cultural avoidance sounds like our cultural blindness or cultural avoidance sounds like a well-intended thing, but it's very dangerous at the end of the day. And it does perpetuate the status quo. And as Canadians, the biggest hurdle is the misbelief that we treat everybody the same in this country. We do not treat everybody all the same in this country. And when it comes time to doing the hard work of change and transformation, challenging the status quo, we fall back to, we got to treat everybody equally. I see this in classrooms. I see this in social services. I see this in education and healthcare. We don't want to provide luxury service. We don't want to provide anybody favorites. We don't want to favorite anybody, right? This is not about favoritism. Equity is giving more time and attention where time and attention is due. Equality perpetuates efficiency. That's why we're addicted to equality, is it's easier. If we just treat everybody the same, it's easier. It takes less time, less resources, less energy. So we are addicted to the equality idea. But equality and equity are not the same things. I work with so many organizations who have equity in the mission statement, the vision statement, and prescribed in the goals and the outcomes. But when I spend time with boots on the ground, I hear a lot of this, we got to treat everybody the same kind of conversation. I'm like, I don't think you know the difference between equality and equity. So we need to get over this hurdle of we treat everybody the same and we avoid culture at all costs. So cultural safety is the new standard. We want to lean into those conversations. Cultural sensitivity is something too. I'm not a fan of the word cultural sensitivity, the term. A lot of people tell me, they're like, Len, we need cultural sensitivity training. I'm like, oh, can you tell me more about that? And they're like, yeah, we need to be more culturally sensitive towards the people that we are providing services to. And I'm like, you should already be doing that. As this kind, progressive, multicultural society that we claim to be in, you should already be sensitive towards other people's cultures. We know it's not happening, but sensitivity for me is too passive. It's, well, I'm going to treat you with kindness and respect. Sensitivity is idle. It rests idly up here. But sensitivity is great, but it doesn't float my boat, because what we need to do is we need to evoke that sensitivity into advocacy, into action, into change and transformation. That's where cultural safety and cultural advocacy really kind of come in. So cultural advocacy also looks like really great allyship. Allyship is speaking up. It's using your voice because it's the right thing to do, not because somebody's watching. You don't need to be Indigenous to advocate for Indigenous cultural safety and humility. That's why I have a team that is not entirely comprised of Indigenous people. We have many people of different cultural backgrounds and ethnic backgrounds and racial backgrounds on our team. You don't need to be Indigenous to talk about Indigenous things, just like you don't need to be a woman to be a feminist. I identify as a feminist because I come from a matriarchal family. Every time I walk into a space, I'm always like looking for the woman in charge, because that's my cultural background. I come from a matriarchal system with very, very strong aunties and grandmothers and mothers in my life. So cultural avoidance, how this looks in your corporate systems as it does in every other system, it looks like superiority, apathy. Oh, well, reconciliation, that's a government thing. Or I'm just one person. Or I'm not responsible for the past. I wasn't there. It's not my fault. This apathy, like it's not my job, somebody else's job. That's punting the responsibility. Everybody, especially in a leadership position, should have some degree of responsibility for advancing cultural safety and reconciliation. It should not fall on the shoulders of the Indigenous department. It should not fall on the shoulders of the one Indigenous staff person on your team or your organization. Many hands make lighter work. It also looks like dominating, saviorism, censoring, remaining silent, limiting, exploiting, consuming, aggressive, violent. Doesn't this just sound like our corporate Western cultures, right? And who benefits from decolonization work? We all do, because this is really perpetuated through colonial ideology as well, and colonial Western values. Cultural advocacy looks more like, when it comes to your language and your behavior, because the greatest tools you can ever add to your tool belt, your cultural safety tool belt, is if you can train yourself and your team to constantly examine, and re-examine your language and your behavior. Safety is always about your language and your behavior. We don't need algorithms. We don't need all these new things. If we have people and we can have a workplace culture where we can train ourselves to say, hey, that language is not okay. Or, hey, I have some feedback for you. I heard what you said back there. That's not really kind of, culturally safe or relevant or appropriate, or it's racist or derogatory in nature, right? But language and behavior, you can constantly train yourself to be in that zone of examining and re-examining it, you're going to be okay. Other things look like humbleness, humility, compassion, empowering, allyship, speaking up, asking questions, sharing, attending to, and vulnerability. So the transformation will come from when we listen, we learn, we lean in, we engage, and this is what I will underscore through and through. Change. Now, this change has to happen over a long period of time. Just being transparent with you. A lot of Canadians who are doing this work think this is about intensity. This is not about intensity. This is about consistency. Kind of like if you ever wanted a six-pack at the gym, right? I went to the gym every single day for 2 weeks. Where's my six-pack? No, but if you go steadily, over, let's say, 2 years or 3 to 5 years, those abs might just pop out, right? So it's our consistency that really matters. I am very worried, and I do not encourage organizations to think about this in intensity. Intensity, and this is our tyranny of efficiency, ideas and actions, only it goes more like this: ideas and actions. Cultural safety, you cannot be culturally safe in that type of tyrannical circle, right? We have to train ourselves to inject a pause. Genocide, colonialism was intentional, strategic, and over a long period of time. So your work in cultural safety and reconciliation will have to be just as intentional, strategic, and over a long period of time. This is a marathon, not a sprint. And then, of course, when we support the tyranny of efficiency, it's really coming from overly focusing on your production, right? How efficiency you are, data, hierarchical, and we only focus on time, right? Time, well, we got to move on. No, blah, blah, blah. That's supporting the tyranny of efficiency. Okay, I'm not going to spend any time here because I'm right out of time, but I will let you know if you want to have access. This slide here is just talking about where all 4 organizations that I work with, that me and my team work with. These are the 4 Ps where we look at change and transformation for any organization, whether you're in education, healthcare, social services. All systems have these 4 Ps: your professional practice, processes, physical places, your policies. These are where we can embed cultural safety, decolonization, and reconciliation. I will let you know where to find these slides. So I will close my presentation portion of this webinar with this quote: "Safety is not the absence of threat, it is in the presence of connection," from Gabor Mate. So with that, I just want to say Haitsep Kasiem. Thank you all with the utmost respect. Thank you so much for having me. I'm going to hand the floor back over to Avneet to moderate any of the questions and comments that are kind of coming in. If you would like access to this slide deck, they are available on my website at lenpierreconsulting.com. Just go to the presentations tab and you will have access to them. If you would like to share this with your team, because I've seen that in the chat box, please do feel free to share all of our resources and content that is available for public consumption. If you have questions for me, if we don't have time to, for whatever, we don't have time to get to them with the remaining time here, here's my email, len@lenpierreconsulting.com. If you want to follow my learning journey or learn more from this big talking head, I invite folks to follow me on social media. I'm on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn. I have a new educational YouTube channel where we provide other webinars that we offer. And we have a new podcast called the Len Pierre Consulting Podcast. So with that, I just raise my hands to each and every one of you and I say, Haitsep Kasiem. Back to you, Avneet. Haichka.
Thank you very much, Len. That was incredible, like just unbelievably wonderful, and far more, I think, powerful than I could have imagined this conversation to be in our preparation that led up to it. So thank you so much. I also raise my hands to you. And thank you for holding the space for us today. I'm going to get into some of the questions that we have because there is the Q&A portion is kind of blowing up. A lot of people want to participate and have a lot of great questions. So I'm going to start with our first question here from Catherine. Catherine asks, can you talk more about the detrimental effects of destabilization and how insecurity makes people easier to control? And I believe this is within a capitalist system.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so when it comes to destabilization within an Indigenous context, I can really speak to this like with all First Nations communities. So in a First Nations context, I can't speak to Métis or Inuit because it's not within my peripheral in my learning journey. But let's say displacement for First Nations people, you know, we had our village sites were on like the most wealthy and abundant areas of our traditional lands and territories. Then through the Indian Act and colonization, we were forced onto reserves in like the poorest quality. And then of course it was illegal for us to leave our reserve for many years. So it created a very a new system that exists in First Nations communities today, which is called a dependency system. And that dependency system is really hard to transform out of or reclaim our traditional ways of governance and ways of being and doing and knowing. So that's what I come to know about displacement for First Nations people. Is it's widely unsettling and continues to be a huge method of systemic oppression, because today, in a time of truth and reconciliation, we have something called manufactured consent. An example of manufactured consent is where the government is now mandated and required to consult with Indigenous peoples on development and expansion of projects within their traditional lands and territories. The government has to consult with First Nations. And so speaking for, you know, my own nation of Keetsi, they're actually twinning the Kinder Morgan pipeline in our territory. And just before the pandemic, I think it was like in 2017 or 2018, the government came to us and said, you know, we have to have a community consultation meeting. And so our whole Keetsi community came together, and the government says, well, we have some options for you. We're twinning this Kinder Morgan pipeline going right through the heart of your territory, and we have some options for you. And we're like, okay, what's the options? Well, option A, you give us consent to do the project. We will pay you a impact benefit, meaning we'll give you a lump sum of money, and then we'll actually hire your members to be a part of this project, and the pipeline will be built. Option B, you don't give us the consent. We won't give you an impact benefit, so no money, and we won't hire any of your First Nations community members, and we're going to build the pipeline. What is the consent? Where is this consent? We teach consent in high schools and university. No means no. And so it still happens today, right? That was just in 2017, 2018. So that's directly tied towards systemic oppression that's alive and well today, and displacement of people from their traditional lands and territories and reserves. Sometimes we get the false illusion that we have some autonomy or some agency, because real agency would be able to say yes or no over your own what matters to you, right? And sorry, Evany, can you repeat the second half of that?
Yeah, it was about destabilization through insecurity. So just having the concept of insecurity is people are easier to control when their insecurity is around and destabilization is around.
Oh, yes. I mean, all Indigenous nations throughout Turtle Island have been impacted by destabilization, and that creates a huge degree of imposter syndrome, a huge degree of lack of self-worth or self-value, because we're not exempt from colonial socialization too, and we're not exempt from colonial ideology. What's colonial ideology? Well, Indigenous people are less deserving, less worthy people. So we have widespread, huge degrees of internalized racism as well. So sometimes it's hard for us to speak up, have a voice, and take space if we don't even feel the calling, if we don't even feel the value or the self-worth, right? So there's a lot of imposter syndrome, rightfully so. We live in a very colonial world. if you look at that pillar that I had in earlier screens with colonial ideology at the top, that's like the Matrix. I don't know if there's any movie geeks here in the space, right? But I'm like, that's the Matrix. We're all plugged into it. Almost none of us know about it. But once you unplug from the Matrix, you're going to be like, wow, that's colonial. That's colonial. That's really colonial. This is super colonial. What I'm doing right now is really colonial. So we are colonizing our mindset and our value system as well. So we're not exempt for that just because we happen to be Indigenous. So we have to decolonize ourselves and reconcile with ourselves as well. Easier said than done, but it is quite widespread. Yeah, so that's how I'd say is it kind of shows up. So it's really hard. It's really hard to speak up for oneself. It's really hard to change. And if you're looking for more words for what you see out there in the world, there's this one I like by the academic named Sharon Stein. She coined a new term called reconciliation fatigue. Reconciliation fatigue is where we as Indigenous people, we get tired, we get burnt out of justifying, protecting, educating, really kind of the world on why we need to be here, why we need to decolonize, why we need land back. We get tired. On the other hand, we have settler fatigue. Settler fatigue is where settlers really don't want to listen, they don't want to engage and don't want to. There's this fear of, that Indigenous rights will come at the cost of settler rights. Take, for example, a good example of settler fatigue is when 215 happened in May 2021. 1 month later was July 1st, Canada Day. And remember when everybody was like, oh, cancel Canada Day. Like, no, Canada, how can we celebrate when half the nation is in mourning right now? It feels icky to celebrate genocide right now on Canada Day, 1 month, 30 days following 215. But there was some Canadians out there who were like, I want my fireworks, I want my beer, my barbecue, and the Canada Day, right? I would say that would be an example of settler fatigue. So that's how I would kind of respond to that.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. So great definitions also going on settler fatigue and is a huge one, especially in ways that it puts the actions on the settlers, on the uninvited occupiers to do the work, as opposed to constantly leaning into Indigenous folks. What do we do? Can you help us? What do we do? So that's a huge part of I think reconciliation in my own journey is doing the work myself and needing to understand that the fatigue comes from the communities that are doing all the education, and it really comes from using your own position in where you are, your own position of privilege and power to understand where you can make a difference or how you can speak up. In relation to that, you had a very good point about celebrating Canada Day in 2021 and how just a lot of the fervor kind of also wear down after a couple of years. So like 2021, we saw a lot of orange shirts on Canada Day, and then, it just kind of started to dwindle down. I can say from my own experience on Lekwungen territory, colonially Victoria, within the past 2-3 years, I've seen just the fatigue itself wear down, because it's like it was brand new news and then it started to settle and everyone's like, well, let's get back to how we normally do things. So in relation to that, we have a question from Dorota. Do you think we should have a First Nations History Month in addition to just having a few days like Indigenous Peoples Day or the National Day of Truth and Reconciliation? What is your opinion on that, Len?
My opinion, and I'm going to be very transparent, that is my opinion, my personal opinion, is I would not recommend that we adopt or go towards a First Nations History Month unless we were also doing a Métis History Month and a Inuit History Month. The term Indigenous is inclusive and encompassing of First Nations, Métis, and Inuit. And it's been my experience that in the Indigenous conversation, there can be a hierarchy, this unspoken hierarchy that if you're Indigenous, that there's this hierarchy of First Nations, then Métis, then Inuit. And I wouldn't really want to kind of create this us and them within our Indigenous context. I don't want to. That's not where, in my opinion, where I would like to see us go. If anything, whose territory are you on? You can create your own month or day if you have autonomy as a health authority or as a school or a university. Make a whole month where you're learning about the territories that you're on. If they're Inuit or Métis or First Nations, but I wouldn't want to see a widespread national First Nations History Month, because that would exclude Métis and Inuit peoples. And solidarity is so important in the work that my family, my team, and I do, that I just wouldn't recommend it, because it would leave out a huge percentage, a huge portion of the Indigenous population. So I wouldn't want to leave anybody behind. I do like National Indigenous History Month in June and National Indigenous Peoples Day, and I think that's a lot, because we have the whole month of June and September. In our context, we see a lot of that happening play through all of September too. But ultimately, if your workplace culture has it within the autonomy, every month can be some Indigenous focused month, right? And that's why I always say orange shirts don't just have to happen on September 30th. Great teams and organizations do, the last Friday of every month, or the last Wednesday of every month is Orange Shirt Day for the entire team, because the orange shirt has kind of become a symbol of potential allyship in our lens, kind of like the rainbow flake for LGBTQ2+. It's easy to be appropriated and tokenized and superficial. I don't think there's any way around that in social justice when we have the climate and context that we're currently working in. But it's small incremental changes over a period of time. Because my worry would be, what happened if we didn't have the rainbow flag? My worry would be, what would happen if we didn't have Orange Shirt Day, right? So these things feel superficial, they feel tokenistic, but I would ask you, if you feel like they're tokenistic, what would happen if we didn't have those things?
Yeah, absolutely. That's wonderful. I really like that idea of the first suggestion that you had of taking a month out, even like a starting point for a month for every organization to just study the territory that you're on. And I think that's a huge part of land acknowledgements, as well as a lot of people, I've had a lot of criticism even from my own circles about, well, like, how can we go further? This is not just what all Indigenous people want. And that is absolutely true. Land acknowledgements do not cause any reparations. They do not necessarily give back any power in any way. But I truly believe, especially as unoccupied and uninvited settlers, it is our job to recognize the land in which we step foot on, the land in which we exist. And the acknowledgement is really surface level. It is the first step, but it's a step that we all have to take. It's a step that we all have to at least break through in order for us to have a lot more knowledge and open our minds up to carry more knowledge around this. There was a great comment from Gina Marshall in the chat about the term decolonize and how it still centers the colonizer, and how they say they prefer the term indigenize. As a Lanu, my apologies if I pronounced that incorrectly, as a Lanu matriarch, this is coming from Gina, looking to become the person that I should have been without the interference of colonialism. So learning my language, practicing my culture, listening to my nation's stories, and relating to the land and all living kin as my ancestors did. So I just wanted to share that as well in the chat, and that talking about how we try and figure out language and the concept of decolonization, just moving past, what the surface level of it is. I have a specific question here from Angie. Absolutely, please go ahead.
I just wanted to respond to that one too. And this is why I think it's so important. You've heard me throughout this entire presentation use these 4 key terms interchangeably: reconciliation, decolonization, Indigenous cultural safety. These three. Those are my go-to terms, because I totally agree that decolonization does center, colonialism. But at the end of the day, we need to name that big pink elephant in the room. That's just my approach and my strategy, is we do need to name it so that we can decolonize it. It does center it, but that's why we have reconciliation and we have cultural safety. And those 3 things do not mean the same thing. Like, I hear them used a lot. Indigenize, the way I understand indigenize, is to bring under Indigenous control and aligned with natural law. And I'm like, it's going to be really hard to indigenize colonial institutions if we don't decolonize them first. So I feel like indigenization, is a very powerful word, but it's kind of like a more advanced step. Mary Simons, being appointed to this place of the first Indigenous Governor General of Canada, example of indigenization. She's Indigenous and she's being put into one of the highest offices of this country, is an example of decolonization. Decolonization is really looking at how colonial systems really are, disrupting them, dismantling them, and deconstructing them because they're so oppressive in nature, because they are so suppressing in nature and isolating in nature too. But my go-to always will be Indigenous cultural safety because it's people-centered and it's process-centered, it's practice-centered, it's change and transformation. Ultimately, all of those three things are about change and transformation, but I think that they're all very different. And if you look at different definitions for them, the real context or the real meaning at the end of the day is the meaning that we apply to it. So I just want to say hi, Chika. Thank you for that comment.
Thank you very much for the response as well. I'm going to move over to a question we have from Angie. While it feels that there is recognition that the Indian Act is a very racist piece of legislation, why does it still exist? And in brackets, she wrote, I feel like this might be a dumb question, but that's, I know, in reference to, you say there are no dumb questions, but is it because it is so entrenched and quote unquote foundational to Canada's colonial ideology? Even if there was political interest to repeal the legislation, would it even be possible? And Angie says, thank you.
Hi, Chika, thank you. Yeah, I agree. No dumb question. It's a really, really good question. And it's also a really, really hard question. And I'm limited in my scope of practice to be able to respond to it because it is very political in nature. If you are interested in learning more about the Indian Act, a great resource I'm always recommending, which I don't see in my little library there, is 21 Things You May Not Know About the Indian Act. So it is incredibly racist and it is incredibly oppressive in nature, the Indian Act, because it still governs and oppresses so many of the decision and the autonomy and the agency of First Nations, more than 600 First Nations in Canada today. I don't think it's widely known that, newcomers to Canada, immigrants to Canada have more rights in this country than people who live under the Indian Act. Because, I mean, for me to even identify as a First Nations person, I have to fill out an application and send it to Ottawa to get the stamp of approval if I qualify for that or not. Access to housing and education and certain other things that come from affiliating with my nation, are really largely dictated to the Indian Act. Our government system, the way we manage our lands and territories is really heavily operated with Ottawa's final say. So that's how oppressive it is in nature. We know that the Indian Act is bad, but we can't get rid of it overnight. And Bob Joseph, who wrote 21 Things You May Not Know About the Indian Act, he has a really great response on how we can get rid of it. He says that we can get rid of the Indian Act when we have 620 plus First Nations who live under the Indian Act today, when they're all seen, heard, and validated as sovereign nations by this country and by the world. Katzie, where I come from, is its own nation. It's a little Italy, it's a little France, it's a little, it's a little country in its own, with its own laws, its own government, its own economy and trade. When we reach that level of agency and autonomy and sovereignty, that's when all 600 plus of those nations have that kind of autonomy. That's when we can get rid of the Indian Act. Because right now it's like a house of cards. It's very precarious. There's certain things that are tied into the Indian Act that keep certain things going, functioning within First Nations communities today. And if we got rid of it, there'd be this big hole left behind in governance and leadership and agency and decision making and a whole bunch of things that keep governments to work. So it's problematic. It's a big nightmare file. And no two Indigenous people are going to agree on what to do with the Indian Act. If you YouTube 21 Things You Didn't Know About the Indian Act, if you YouTube that, some really great conversations will come up with a panel, intellectual panel, political panel of Indigenous people who talk about it. It's very enlightening. Good question. Oh, I started sweating with that one.
That was a hard one. I can't lie, because it's very specific, but it's also so broad in such a historical context, like you said. So there is like specific expertise that we bring to the table, but there's also a lived experience aspect to it as well. So yeah, that was a fabulous answer. You did very well under pressure. Our next question comes from, I believe it's pronounced Jaime. How can organizations create safety for internal employees who challenge colonialism? So this is a great question and something that I am personally also interested in. I've witnessed and experienced serious retribution to careers when status quo was challenged. And Jaime also mentioned that they love your presentation.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's such a good question. So here's what I'm always looking for, and there are promising practices that I've seen, not in the direct context of decolonization, but in cultural safety, in working in crisis like anti-racism in the healthcare system. You know, there are these little small examples of some good work that helps people continue to do the good work. So one of the things that I'm always looking for organizations, and I've actually learned this from the settler scholar and activist, Dr. Vicki Reynolds. Any Dr. Vicki Reynolds fans in the space here? You know, she really kind of encourages folks to develop a lean in culture. If we want to talk about decolonization in our very colonial institutions, we need call out culture, call in culture, and lean in culture. And those are not the same things. But ultimately, what we need are cultures of criticism in our organizations. And it's really hard to speak up, to advocate and use your voice if you don't have a lean in culture. If you are perpetuating, if your organization, right, is in its early days of no, you know, feedback is not welcome, feedback is not encouraged, that's really hard. That's really hard for us to advocate for ourselves. If you are speaking up and against colonialism, and if you're speaking for decolonization, we burn ourselves out, or we're discouraged from our work. That's the burden that we all bear, right? When we're activists, when we're leaders, when we're advocates in this good work. But you can start to plant the seeds with creating feedback culture, cultivating cultures of critique. We need to be able to say, hey, can we make this less colonial? Or hey, is this too colonial? Right? We're all at meetings where we're on projects, policies, pathways. You know, we all come to meetings to strategize. And sometimes those strategies are very colonial, very oppressive in nature, very status quo, very driven by the tyranny of efficiency. But if your advocacy can be, and this is what I've tried to practice, what I teach on the invitational line, can we, should we, can we discuss, you know, does this seem a little bit more colonial in nature? Is there a way we can make this less colonial? That's you know, using we language. Or you can use I language. Like I've learned that, you know, this is actually quite reflective of colonialism and the tyranny of efficiency, which isn't culturally safe for Indigenous peoples. So is there a way we can make this less colonial? So you're using an example of your own learning journey. I'm just gonna be transparent with you because I know some of you are probably already doing this. A lot of people think we need to call out colonialism or call out decolonization. And I'm like, yeah, but it's, you know, you catch more bees with honey. You know, calling out is not really constructive. Calling out is not really healthy, because when you call people out, it seems like, I'm not saying it is, it seems like it's interpreted as an attack on somebody's identity, right? And it's also an attack on somebody's work. And so this is what I train in the corporate world, is how to establish cultures of criticism, cultures of critique, and how we can talk about this without feeling like we need to call anybody out. Because if you call people out, you know, it could be the make or break moment where that person's like, well, I tried doing what I did in reconciliation, cultural safety, got called out on it, so I'm not even going to touch that anymore. And then they're going to be the gatekeeper for so many more future things, right? So with my lateral, with my trauma-informed hat on, I really try to use invitational language. Does it sound like, is it okay if we, do you mind if we, can I ask a question? That's how I try to mobilize that. But if you feel like you're operating in a very colonial system and you're Indigenous, or you're not Indigenous, but you're actively advocating for decolonization, and you feel like you're burning out, this is where circles of solidarity really kind of comes in. So if you can find other people to be in solidarity with, then they can keep filling up your cup. You need like-minded, like-hearted individuals. You need a community that you can come home to rekindle your fire, rekindle your flame, so you can go back into that very colonial tyranny of efficiency infrastructure and keep doing the good fight. If you're looking for a community, come follow me. We have a learning community called LPC Learning Community. If you go to our website and go to our online courses, all of our people who graduate from our online courses get access to an LPC learning community. And it's meant to be a circle of solidarity with educators, with healthcare providers, with government officials, with anybody who wants to continue to be in a community of decolonization, reconciliation, cultural safety, come check out our learning community. That can be your moment of solidarity.
That's wonderful. That's actually a really great way to try and push yourself to continue to learn, but also, I guess, be doing so in a more active way in which you're actually engaging with folks of like-minded people. Because I can definitely speak from personal, professional experience that having that like-minded community to help you do that work and to push through these initiatives and these thoughts is so critical. Like you said, many hands make light work. That allows us to be able to lift up the voices that really need to be listened to, and very much allow us to engage in the work in a much more meaningful way when it's person to person and it's person first and not so organization trying to check some things off of a box. We have time for about one more question, and there's a couple of options here, but I'm going to go ahead and ask a question by Liz B. I hope I pronounced your name correctly. If it's Liz, my apologies. As a 90s Indigenous kid myself, so this question is for you, Len. How did you reconcile your own journey of deconstructing the colonial socialization within yourself? So very deep, very big, but maybe if you can answer it within 5 minutes, we'd love to know.
I love it. I love it. It was a rather painful experience, and I wouldn't say that I'm out of the woods yet. It's painful, and here's something for everybody to think about too: as we think about decolonization, reconciliation, cultural safety. This is our colonial brains. Our colonial brains are so driven by this external. You need to do this. You need to do this. It's action. It's what you have to touch. We think outside ourselves. But I tell you, the magical first step always has to be the opposite. It has to be journey inwards. You have to start inside. If you want to do decolonization, you have to start asking yourself, how colonial are you? How influenced have you been by colonialism, colonial values, and colonial cultures? How has that shaped how your framework, your worldview really is? And so it's been a very painful process because you go through like your, for lack of a better analogy, a snake shedding skin, which I can only imagine might be a painful process. Or a more beautiful analogy would be a cocoon, butterfly blossoming, right? But there has to be your own transformation first. And I'm on my own learning journey. I mean, I am not exempt from very sometimes debilitating imposter syndrome. When I went to do my master's degree, I mean, oh my God, I was just waiting for somebody to, at any point throughout the whole 2 years, to come tap me on the shoulder and be like, sorry, Len, there's been some terrible mistake, but you actually didn't meet the criteria to be in this master's degree program, so you have to go. I'm like, great, thanks, thank you so much. And then we'll go, right? So it's constantly checking and evaluating my own beliefs. That's been the biggest part, where I picked up beliefs from. And then all of my own deficits, because colonial ideology and socialization always spoke to my deficits, that I'm not handsome enough, that I'm not fair enough, that I'm not wealthy enough, that I'm not smart enough, that I'm not tall enough, that I'm not, all of these things. And so I really had to be with those. That has been the most beautiful moment in my own experience of how to decolonize myself and detach and liberate myself from colonial ideology and colonial socialization, is with all of my deficits, which are usually I'm not enough, because I've been socialized too. And really seen myself in a pyramid. There is this unspoken pyramid in Canada, right? As it is in the United States. And I learned this from Robin DiAngelo. Robin DiAngelo, who wrote the book on white fragility, there's this unspoken hierarchy that the fairer your skin is, the higher you are in that racial hierarchy in Western society. And the darker your skin is, the lower you are on that social hierarchy, how you're accepted and tolerated in this country. But guess who didn't even make that hierarchy? We're Indigenous peoples. And I saw myself that as a child. I saw myself in the world as a young person. And even as a young adult, when I first started working in the education system as an educator, I saw myself as an other, a lesser than, because that directly came from colonial ideology and socialization. So I had to journey inward first, examine my questions and doubts and fears about myself, and then really ground myself in my own cultural way of being and doing and knowing, which I had all along with my language, my elders, my matriarchs, the 100 aunties that I have at KC, and for my ancestors. That was my own reclamation, and that gave me my juice to be able to do what I do today.
That's so beautiful. And just also, I think definitely a very personal answer. And I can relate to a lot of that inward looking, because I think there is, as you go through, and I obviously don't have the Indigenous experience, only have the uninvited settler experience of being a racialized person, and having that, you know who you are, and you always are aware of like where it falls in under the hierarchy. And that the concept of imposter syndrome is so real, because it's like you can never give yourself a break. It doesn't matter what, how much credit or how many qualifications you create, you can never give yourself that credit. And it really does come into this internal hierarchy in your brain where you're just like, maybe I don't belong here. And I think it does, a lot of that needs to come with like, you do belong here, and you are also part of what is going to change the system. You being here and you participating is really what allows the system to change and to grow. So yeah, that was wonderful. I really like that question. I'm really happy you were able to answer that, because that's, I think, speaks to a lot of folks in the room, just in terms of maybe not even just when we're born or how we're born, but really reconciling with everything around us and how that affects what we're thinking about. I know it really related to the first part of your presentation where you had the pictures of anti-Indigenous representation, and a lot of those are very 80s 90s imagery, and the concept of that, having that ingrained in your ideology for a long time creates a big difference. And so having to look inwards is the first step, and always the hardest step, like that first step in like, how do I break through this within myself? So yeah, I want to extend a huge thank you for being here, Len. Thank you so much for sharing, for being so generous with your spirit and with your knowledge today. I'm going to pass it back over to our host, Clea, who will close up for our evening, for our session for today. And thank you again for being here, Len. We really appreciate it.
Aichka, thank you so much for having me, and Haitsap Kasiyam. Thank you all.